In 1955, a man named Bill Allen bet his entire company on one airplane. He mortgaged the future of 27,000 American workers on a single decision to build the Boeing 707. The board told him he was insane. The bankers told him he was finished. His own engineers told him the math didn't work. He did it anyway, and it worked. For 70 years, every single time you looked up and saw a passenger jet cutting through the sky, you were looking at Bill Allen's bet paying off. Last year, Boeing lost $10.7 billion in 12 months. That is more than the company made in profit across the entire decade of the 1990s combined. The stock dropped. Engineers got laid off. A door blew off a 737 at 16,000 feet. And while America watched its most iconic industrial company bleed out in real time, a laboratory in Chongqing, China was quietly putting the finishing touches on the metal that just killed aluminum forever. The metal that built Bill Allen's empire. The metal that let America rule the sky for 3 generations of pilots, 3 generations of engineers, 3 generations of American workers. That metal is dying tonight. And by the time this video ends, you're going to understand why your grandson will probably never fly in an American-built passenger jet again. Because what just happened is not a slow decline, it is an execution. And the executioner is a Chinese alloy that almost nobody outside of aerospace metallurgy has even heard the name of. It's called 2060, and right now it is the most important number in commercial aviation. To understand why, you have to understand the metal it just replaced. For 70 years, aluminum ruled the sky, not because anyone loved it, because nothing else came close. Wood was too weak, steel was too heavy, titanium was too expensive. Aluminum was the perfect compromise, light enough to fly, strong enough to survive, cheap enough to mass produce. The Boeing 707, the 727, the 737, the 747, the 777. Every single airplane that made America the dominant commercial aviation power on Earth was 80% aluminum alloy. It was an aluminum empire, and empires don't last forever. The problem with aluminum is that it has a ceiling. There is only so much weight you can take out of it before it stops being a structural metal. And in aviation, weight is everything. Every single kilogram you can remove from an airplane saves the airline roughly $3,000 per year in fuel. Multiply that by 20,000 kilograms of structural weight. Multiply that by a fleet of 400 aircraft. Multiply that by a 30-year service life. And you start to understand why aerospace engineers have spent the last 40 years obsessed with one single question. How do we make this thing lighter? Because lighter wins. Lighter always wins. Boeing thought they had it locked. They didn't. While Boeing was busy patching their own crisis, engineers leaving, factories slowing down, that door blowing out at altitude, the FAA in their boardroom every week, Southwest Aluminum Industry in Chongqing was doing something nobody outside of 3 companies on Earth had ever done. They were turning lithium into aluminum. Here is what that actually means. Lithium is the 3rd element on the periodic table. It is the lightest metal that exists. When you add lithium to aluminum, something remarkable happens. Every 1% of lithium you add, just 1%, reduces the density of the metal by 3% and increases its stiffness by 6%. That sounds small. It is not small. In an airplane, a 3% density reduction means you can build the same structure with less material. A 6% stiffness increase means you can use thinner panels for the same strength. Combine the two, and you get a structural metal that is up to 30% lighter than traditional aircraft aluminum. Same strength, better corrosion resistance, longer fatigue life. That is not an improvement. That is a generational leap. The problem is that nobody could make it at industrial scale. For 50 years, metallurgists tried. The first-generation aluminum-lithium alloys, developed in the 1970s, cracked under stress. The second generation, in the 1990s, corroded too fast. Only 3 places on Earth ever cracked the 3rd generation, the one that actually works in commercial airplanes: the American company Alcoa, the French company Constellium, and as of 2022, Southwest Aluminum Industry in China. China was the last to get there, and then they passed everyone. Here is what aluminum-lithium 2060, the Chinese perfected third-generation alloy, does in a real airplane. A Boeing 737 weighs roughly 41,000 kilograms when it's empty. Replace just the fuselage skin and the wing boxes with 2060 alloy, and that same airplane drops to 35,000 kilograms, 6,000 kilograms lighter. That's the weight of 78 adult passengers. Gone. For free. Every flight, every day, for the next 30 years. Now multiply that fuel savings across a fleet of 400 aircraft. You're looking at over $500 million saved in fuel over the life of that fleet. And right now in 2026, China is the only country mass-producing this alloy at the scale needed to actually build entire commercial airliners out of it. The United States can technically make it. China is actually making it. There is a difference. A very expensive difference. Now here is the part that, if you're an American watching this, is going to genuinely hurt. Until 2017, China's airplane manufacturer COMAC was forced to buy their aluminum-lithium alloy from Alcoa, an American company in Pittsburgh. They couldn't make their own. They didn't have the metallurgy. They didn't have the casting technology. They didn't have the heat treatment knowledge. Every gram of the most critical structural metal in their flagship airplane, the C919, had to be imported from the United States. Boeing's biggest future competitor was literally buying its bones from an American supplier. Then Southwest Aluminum spent 4 years quietly reverse engineering the entire process. They built the furnaces. They figured out the casting. They cracked the heat treatment. They developed 2 of their own grades, 2196 and 2060, and by 2022, every gram of aluminum-lithium in a Chinese passenger jet was Chinese-made. America's last leverage in aerospace metallurgy, gone. The thing Boeing's supply chain depended on, China now makes better and cheaper. And that was just the beginning. If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe. I'm putting one of these out every single week, breaking down the technologies and shifts that are actually reshaping the world, the things the regular news won't touch because it doesn't fit their story. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now back to the part that genuinely hurts, because the metal is one thing, the numbers are something else. And Boeing's numbers, right now in 2026, are not the numbers of a company that's having a bad year. They are the numbers of a company in cardiac arrest. $10.7 billion. That is what Boeing lost from operations in fiscal year 2024. Revenue dropped from $77.8 billion in 2023 to $66.5 billion the following year. Shareholders lost $18.36 per share. That is not a soft quarter. That is a collapse. And the executives in their headquarters in Arlington, Virginia know it. In March of 2025, something happened that genuinely shocked the aviation industry. Michael O'Leary, the Irish billionaire who runs Ryanair, Europe's largest airline, sitting on a Boeing order of 330 airplanes worth $30 billion, publicly stated that he would consider buying COMAC's C919 as a Boeing replacement. Washington panicked. Congress sent letters. O'Leary doubled down. Think about what it took for an Irish billionaire who has been buying Boeing airplanes for 30 years, a man whose entire airline was built on the back of the 737, whose entire fleet, whose entire business model is wrapped around an American airplane, to publicly say in 2025 that he is looking at a Chinese alternative. That is not a press release. That is a 30-year relationship breaking, live on the record in front of the entire industry. And Ryanair isn't alone. Cathay Pacific's chief executive Ronald Lam said it openly at a Fortune conference last year. The future of commercial aviation, he said, is not a duopoly anymore. It is ABC, Airbus, Boeing, and COMAC. AirAsia is already in talks with COMAC. Air China has ordered over 100 C919s. China Eastern, China Southern, Hainan Airlines. Combined Chinese airline order book for the C919 is now over 1,200 aircraft. 1,200 airplanes that 20 years ago would have been Boeing 737s. Every single one of those orders is a Boeing factory in Renton, Washington that doesn't get built. Every single one is an American machinist whose son will not get the same job his father had. That is the math. That is the real math. And the executives in Arlington know it. But here is the truly ugly part. The aluminum problem, that's actually the small one. The big one is what's wrapped around the aluminum. Stay with me, because this is where it gets bad. Modern airplanes aren't just metal anymore. The most advanced commercial aircraft on the planet, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, is 50% carbon fiber composite material by structural weight. Carbon fiber is even lighter than aluminum-lithium, stronger too. The problem is carbon fiber for airplanes is extraordinarily difficult to manufacture. Until very recently, only Japan and the United States produced it at the scale needed for commercial aviation. Boeing's 787, the airplane that supposedly represented the future of American aviation, gets its carbon fiber from Toray, a Japanese company. In April of 2026, Toray hit Boeing with a price surcharge on carbon fiber. The reason? Disruption at the Strait of Hormuz, which threatened global shipping. Think about what that means. The single most critical structural material in Boeing's most advanced airplane is now subject to surcharges from a Japanese supplier whose own supply chain runs through the Persian Gulf. American aviation in 2026 is hostage to decisions made in Tokyo and Tehran. Chinese aviation made in China. The C919 uses 12% T800 grade carbon fiber composite material, produced in China by Chinese companies. Combined with the 2060 aluminum-lithium alloy in the fuselage, the entire airplane is 7% lighter than the Boeing 737 it competes against. 7%. That doesn't sound like much. It is everything. 7% lighter equals 7% less fuel burned per flight equals millions of dollars in savings per airplane per year. And it is only the beginning. Right now, in 2026, 2 Chinese companies are building the largest carbon fiber manufacturing facilities ever constructed. Xpeng Aerot and Aerofugia, the second one owned by Geely, the same group that owns Volvo. By 2028, these 2 factories alone will outproduce every American carbon fiber facility combined. The supply chain that Boeing depends on, the one running through Japan, is about to be irrelevant because the country that builds the next generation of airplanes will be the country that controls the carbon fiber. And that country is no longer the United States. Bill Allen's Boeing, the company that built the launch vehicle that put a man on the moon, the company that built the B-52 that won the Cold War, the company that every American kid in 1962 could name without thinking, now buys the most critical part of its most advanced airplane from a Japanese supplier who just got hit with a Chinese-driven price increase. That is the world we live in tonight, and that is the world your grandson is going to inherit if nothing changes. But the real punch, the one that closes the coffin, hasn't even landed yet. Because the C919 is just the warm-up. The C919 is China's narrow-body airplane, the one that competes with the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. It is the small, single-aisle workhorse. It is not where Boeing makes its real money. Boeing makes its real money on wide-body airplanes, the long-haul, twin-aisle giants that fly transcontinental routes, the 787 Dreamliner, the 777, the airplanes that sell for $300 million each instead of $120 million, the airplanes where the profit margins are real, the airplanes where Boeing has for decades been untouchable. China just touched it. The airplane is called the C929, wide body, twin aisle, 280 to 300 passengers. Designed to fly transcontinental transoceanic routes, targeted to enter commercial service by 2030. And here is the killer specification. Over 50% of its structural weight will be composite materials, carbon fiber, aluminum-lithium, titanium. That matches the Boeing 787 exactly. Same materials science, same weight class, same passenger count, same range, different price tag. If China builds a Boeing 787 equivalent at 70% of the price, and they will, every single airline in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and South America switches. And those 4 regions represent over 80% of all global aviation growth between now and 2050. That is not a competition. That is a takeover. Boeing has 4 years to figure out how to respond. They will not figure it out. The infrastructure is gone, the metallurgy is gone, the supply chain is gone, the engineering pipeline is gone. Most of the smartest young aerospace engineers in America go to SpaceX, not Boeing, and the ones who do go to Boeing leave within 3 years. The company that Bill Allen built, that defined American industrial supremacy for 7 decades, is being dismantled in real time by a metal called 2060, a carbon fiber facility in Chengdu, and a wide-body airplane that hasn't even taken its first flight yet. Which brings us back to Bill Allen, sitting in his office in 1955, betting his entire company on a single airplane. He won that bet. He won the sky for America for 70 years. And in 2026, the executives in Arlington are sitting in their offices watching that bet expire. They didn't lose to Airbus. They didn't lose to the regulators. They didn't lose to a hostile takeover. They lost to a metal, aluminum-lithium 2060, that an American company invented in the 1980s and a Chinese company perfected in the 2020s. The empire didn't fall to an army. It fell to a periodic table. Here is what I want you to tell me in the comments below. If you have ever flown on a Boeing airplane, and most of you watching this have flown on dozens of them, when do you think the last American-built commercial passenger jet rolls off an assembly line? 2035? 2040? Never? Drop your year in the comments. I genuinely want to see what you think, because the date most of you write down is probably going to be earlier than you'd want to admit. And if this video showed you something you genuinely did not know, something that the regular news isn't covering because it doesn't fit the political story they're trying to sell you, hit subscribe. There are more of these coming. The next one is on what is happening to the airplane engine. Because the metal is bad. The composites are worse. The engine is where it gets really ugly for Boeing. Until then.